Might be more appropriate after you hear what I have to say following this, but we'll see who comes up for caramel anyways, in spite of what I say, but that's all right. So we're kind of stepping back into our series this week, and it's a series that we've been looking at the last couple of weeks on the book of Proverbs. And the Proverbs is one of those great books because it's written by a couple of other individuals as they are looking back on their life with the understanding of what does it look like to truly live a wise life? What does it truly look like to live all of life with God? And so 2 weeks ago, we looked at kind of our foundational verse as being Proverbs 3:6 that says, "In all your ways, acknowledge God." And so every week now, leading up into Easter, we're going to look at real practical ways as to how it is we live out our faith. Because one of the things we don't want to become is just simply people who may necessarily believe the right things, but then don't see it playing out in the midst of life. That following Jesus is not simply an intellectual pursuit. There's absolutely things we have to learn and things we have to struggle with, but ultimately, we need to begin to apply them into our lives as well. And so our hope is that every Sunday as we gather here, we will learn new things and probably be reminded of old things, that ways in which we can live out our faith on a day-to-day, Monday to Saturday sort of deal. And so I encourage you to kind of join us on Sunday mornings to also begin reading through, if you haven't already, read through the book of Proverbs, as there is just some incredible just kind of tidbits given to us by God. Real practical, real down-to-earth, living out our faith. And then every week we're going to kind of tease out a little bit more and to see how does this begin to apply into the midst of all of our lives as well. Because one of the incredible things about Jesus was just how when he came, he met people where they were at. But he always spoke in such a way that he was described as his wisdom being beyond anyone else who had ever taught before. And I often think that was because he again began to apply it into all of life. As to this is what it looks like day to day living with me. And so that's really going to be our focus. So this morning we're going to pluck out a few more proverbs, a few more sound bites, depending on what you're following, another tweet by God, and begin to see how does this work out into my life as well. So I'm going to invite Amy to come up and read these and just be thinking, what is the area that we could be touching upon here this morning?
Proverbs 25, 16, 17, 25, 28. If you find honey, eat just enough. Too much of it, and you will vomit. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house. Too much of you, and he will hate you. Proverbs 27. It is not good to eat too much honey, nor is it honorable to seek one's own honor. Proverbs 27:12. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it.
So we're going to look at a broad stroke theme. What do you think we're talking about here this morning? Anyone? Self-control, right? This reality, and I hope you appreciate the gentleness in which I've done this. I didn't talk about this a couple days after people make New Year's resolutions, right? I thought I'd kind of ease it in a little bit, maybe become a little bit more practical, but this reality of self-control. And I just love some of those verses. That's actually the verse that if you brought kids with you here this morning, that's the candy verse right there. Don't eat too much honey or you will vomit. Candy is a modern day version of that. But I love this one as it goes on to say, don't go to your neighbor's house too often or they will hate you. As an aside, I don't recommend you putting that up in your front entranceway as a proverb. Sometimes people like to crochet Bible verses. That's not one I would put up. But it gets to the point of the reality of self-control, that too much of a good thing sometimes lead to challenges and problems. Self-control, I think, if we were honest, is an issue that we all wrestle with. an issue that we all deal with in our own lives. And although we may have different areas that we need to exercise self-control in, it doesn't mean that the general principle does not work in the midst of all of life. I mean, just think about it right now. If you make New Year's resolutions or not, how many of them revolve around this aspect of self-control? I want to get into better shape, so I am going to be less lazy and I'm going to eat better. It's the area of food. I don't want to go as far into debt, so it's an area of self-control. There's always these self-improvement things that we come through, and we have these great ideas, but then so often they fail to take root in our own lives. And so I thought it'd be real wise to begin to look at, what does the Bible say about this? Because if you read through Proverbs, you see different proverbs around self-control continually popping up. And even more than that, if you begin to read through the entirety of the Bible, you see how so much of Scripture is revolving around this reality of being people who are able to exercise self-control in all of life. And so my hope this morning is we're going to look at some general principles as to how this can become more of a reality for us, understanding that all of us kind of struggle in different areas of life. And so I may touch on some of those areas here today, but if I don't touch on your area of struggle, it doesn't mean that you're off the hook. It just means we didn't have time, and it means that one of the things we need to do is when we go home is to begin to self-analyze and say, okay, how do these principles begin to apply to my own area of struggle? How is God going to be at work in my life? You see, this is a practical working out of Proverbs 3:6. In all your ways, acknowledge God. And one of the best ways that we acknowledge Him is in coming to Him with the struggles that we face in life. So I just want to go through just a couple thoughts that really kind of come to mind for me in terms of what some of the issues are around this topic of self-control. Because whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, very few people will say, yeah, self-control, it's overrated. I don't need self-control in my life. We see this as a practical reality, but then as we kind of lay it out, I'm hoping to kind of give us a few tools so that we can begin to apply it practically into our own life as well. Because one of the great challenges with self-control is that they deal with good things in life. We're not tempted with things that we don't like. We're tempted with good things in life that too often we go too far with, that lead us into the danger zone. And one of the things we have to get our mind wrapped around is the idea of understanding that God is the giver of good things. That so many of the good things that we have in life, all of the good things that we have in life, have been given to us by God. And what we need to do is to understand the scope and the parameters with which He has set these good things, and then begin to apply them into our own life. I mean, just think of the many good things that so often we go beyond the scope of what God wants for us. Issues of food, of money, success, sex, appearance. I mean, the list could go on and on and on, but these are all things that are given to us by God within a certain understanding, within certain parameters. And one of the dangers is that there's a different message as to how we should exercise these good things given to us by God as opposed to what culture says. You see, one of the interesting things about culture is that culture will bait us to the edge. We'll always say, you should have more. You deserve more. And then when we get so close to the edge and we actually fall off the edge, culture turns around and mocks us. I mean, think of the perfect example of consumer debt, right? We constantly read and we constantly see, you deserve that bigger home. You deserve that nicer house. You deserve that better car. You deserve that vacation. That one really rings true when it's minus 12 outside and you're slipping on the ice. And so what do? We buy on credit, we purchase on credit, we get more and more and more, and then we get deeper and deeper and deeper into debt when suddenly it's gone too far, and then suddenly, culture suddenly says, shame, shame, what were you thinking? I was just simply responding to the message that I was being inundated with on a day-to-day basis. Which is why it's so interesting that when you begin to read through the Bible, so much of what the teachings of Jesus, so much of what the teachings of Scripture are setting these parameters of self-control. Why? Because Jesus says, I have come so that you may have an abundant life, a life worth living. And Jesus goes on to say, and I'm the one who wants to show you what that life begins to look like. So it's a matter of listening to me. It's a matter of following me, even when there seems to be places where you think, oh, I would like so much more of that. God is saying, pull in the reins and trust in me. And so that's one of the challenges. One of the things I've also learned about self-control is that by giving in to the urge doesn't actually take the tension away. It only increases the appetite, deplenishes your resolve, and draws you closer to a breaking point. You know, sometimes we think, well, you know, if a little bit is good, then so much more will be better, and we just indulge ourselves. And in the moment, it may feel right and it may feel good, but then we suddenly realize, no, the urge hasn't gone away. It's just increased my appetite. And now that I've gone this far, I need to go a little bit further. And what's a little bit harm in going further and further and further? And suddenly we get into that whole idea of the slippery slope that we've taken so much that now we are getting closer and closer to the edge, and greater disaster is about to appear. And so how do we respond? How do we respond in a practical way? How do we respond in a God-honoring way with these urges, with these temptations, with these areas in life that we are drawn to, that God doesn't want to say, well, you know what, I'm just taking away all these good things in life because clearly you can't deal with them, but rather giving us the means and the ways to properly enjoy the good things from God in a real practical way, in a real healthy way, in a real honoring way. And so I want our focus to be on Proverbs 25:28. And we're going to put it up on the screen. And this is going to be kind of our focus verse for today. It says, like a city whose walls are broken down is a person who lacks self-control. And so the image I want to kind of leave you with here this morning is when we think of this reality of self-control is this positive image of building walls around our life. Now, in the ancient world, it was very common for there to be walls around a city because that was an important means of defense. That unlike today, oftentimes cities without walls would be very vulnerable because other nations or raiding armies, as they would pass through, if they saw a city without a wall, it was like easy picking. It was like, this is going to be no problem at all because their initial line of defense was not there. And that's the image that God gives to us of self-control. Is are we building walls around those areas of temptation so that we are protecting ourselves from attack? When we lived in Malawi, one of the responsibilities that Rebecca and I had was to oversee volunteers as they would come in. You know, making sure that they were settled and making sure that everything was okay. And one of the things that we had to do was always to find accommodation for them. And in Malawi, almost everybody lived with a wall around their house. It was a necessary means of protection. And so we had one particular volunteer who one day showed up, and she had to stay in a different home. And when pushed on, I said, listen, you can't move into your other home yet because we haven't built a wall. And the wall would typically be this elephant grass, which was very strong and sturdy grass with kind of razor wire inside of it. So it wasn't pretty, It wasn't really great. It absolutely destroyed your view, but it was necessary. And this one volunteer says, no, 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 no. I don't want to live any place where I have to live behind a wall. And so you know what my response was? Well, then I guess you're not going to live in Malawi, because that is the reality, right? And so think about it. In ancient days, if you were living in a city and you had a massive wall around you, you could sit there and think, oh man, this wall, it just seems so restrictive. You know, it's ruining my view. I can't easily get outside of the city. I have to go a little bit further. It's sometimes cumbersome. No one would say that, because they had a bigger perspective, a better understanding of saying, no, this wall serves a greater purpose. It's there to protect me. And so one of the first things we begin to do is when we look at areas of self-control, areas of building walls around us, is in asking the question, what is it that I value, that I want to protect? What area in my life do I struggle with, but that I need to build a wall around so that I am not setting myself up for greater danger? Let me just give you a couple of examples. One of the issues that so often is spoken of in Scripture is that of money. You know, Jesus speaks often about the issue of money. And Paul, in writing to Timothy, his young apprentice who is growing up and going to be a leader in the church, Paul gives this advice to him as well. And notice the subtle difference, because oftentimes when we think about building walls and having areas of self-control around money, we think around areas of spending, right? And that makes sense. This whole idea that I don't want to buy more and more and more because I'm going to plunge myself into greater debt, and I need to be careful of that. That is absolutely true, and that's one area of self-control. But a second area Paul touches on in 1 Timothy 6:16. It says, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs." And so the area of self-control that Paul is actually speaking about is not around spending, it's around earning. Have you ever thought of that? Have you ever thought that perhaps we need to build walls of self-control around how eager we are to earn money? Because if we're so eager to earn money, what is it that we are hurting? Potentially our own health. You become a workaholic. You work more and longer hours. You neglect your own health. That becomes a problem. You can neglect your family. You can neglect your faith. And suddenly we begin to see that what Paul is saying makes perfect sense. That so often in trying to earn more and more and more, Paul's actually saying, you know what? You may need to guard yourself with that. And what I appreciate about it is Paul doesn't say how much is too much. It's a personal decision that we have to wrestle with and say, have I been consumed with trying to earn more and more? And do I need to build some walls of self-control? Another big issue that the Bible speaks often about is around the issue of sex. And so often the church does such a terrible job with this because it's almost taboo or it's almost hush-hush. But last time I checked, the Bible tells us that God gave sex as a means to celebrate and enjoy within a certain relationship. And that when we don't build walls of self-control, walls of protection, whether we are married or not, we could be doing potential danger to ourselves and damage down the line. Which is why Jesus at one point gets real clear about it, and he says, listen, you know the whole issue about adultery, but I want to talk to you about lust. And Jesus says, if you lust after another person, you've really already committed adultery in your life. And then he goes on to say something unbelievable. He says it's better for you to pluck out your eyes than for you to look lustfully at another person. And so you think, oh my goodness, Does Jesus honestly want me to pluck out my eyes? I don't think so, because then all of us would be blind here today. Let's just be honest about these types of things. So what is Jesus doing? He is telling us the importance of developing self-control, the importance of building walls around these important areas of life so that we don't cause greater damage to ourselves. And so again, that becomes personal choices, becomes different issues. I know of one man who spoke publicly about it, who is well known and speaks often around North America. So he's on the road a lot. And so he spends a lot of time alone in hotel rooms. And so one of the areas that he struggled with was watching inappropriate things on TV. And so he would go, the very first thing that he would do, when he would walk into a hotel, he would walk up to the front desk, get his key, check in, and then say, embarrassingly often, "Can you please lock the inappropriate channels on my TV?" And the receptionist would often look at him like, "What is wrong with you?" But he knew that this was an area of struggle. He knew that he needed to put these measures in place ahead of time, because when he was alone in his room, when he had access to these things, when it was late at night, the temptation became too great. It reminds us of what Proverbs 27:12 says, "The prudent see danger and take refuge." You see, one of the things about building a wall of self-control is that you have to be intentional and consistent. You can't just simply say, "Yeah, this is an area in my life that I struggle with." It's like the same person who lives in a city and says, "Yeah, we know there's a real good chance we're going to be raided. You know, there's a real good chance another army is going to come in, and we should really get to that wall, but another day, another day." We have to start building. We have to start putting these walls of protection around us. And not only do we need to be intentional, but we have to be consistent as well. You see, self-control is a great mechanism to avoid regret. It's that barrier that prevents us from going too far. And it has to be put in place intentionally ahead of time, because when we find ourselves in that danger zone, chances are it's going to be harder for us to make decisions. Alcohol is another great example, right? Some people, their measure of self-control of building a wall is saying, I will not have a single drink because I know what it could lead to. Other people may say, I may have 1 or 2 drinks, but then that is where I'm going to stop. Because the issue is then you have 1 or 2 and then 3 and 4, and then you think, I should really stop, and then you don't, and then it goes further and further, and you get further and further down the road, and you fall into problems. And you say, if only I would have put this measure of self-control around. It's essentially like drawing a line in the sand and saying, this is as far as I'm going to go, and I'm not going to go any further. You know what's interesting is that it's not about being legalistic. Because our measures of self-control, the walls that we build, is not about comparing to others. It's not about placing it on others, but it is a personal decision of knowing this is how far I can go, and I'm going to go no further. And there's such a high value on this that the Apostle Paul, in speaking to the Christians, the Galatians, actually says one of the evidence of the Holy Spirit at work in your life is that you are able to exhibit self-control. One of the realities of God at work in you is self-control. So it's not about becoming legalistic. It's not about saying this is now going to be a marker of my faith, but it's a way in which your faith in a real practical, everyday way is lived out. It's a matter of trusting God, of saying, God, I trust you enough that you know what is best for me. And with your help, I want to not only put measures in my life, but I want you to help me so that when I find myself in those places of struggle and temptation, you will be the one encouraging me and walking with me. One of the things I've found in practicing self-control is not only does it protect me, not only does it protect others, not only does it deepen my faith, but these lines in the sand that we draw can oftentimes be a launching point for God to use us in something far greater. You know, so often we think that, what is God's will for my life? And we think of the big decisions, we think of the big moments, and we wonder, okay, what should I do here? And so often what God says is just trust me in the small things. Trust me in your areas of struggle. Begin to listen to my voice and follow my wisdom, and you will see yourself grow. You will see yourself begin to develop that abundant life. And not only that, it's often these small decisions that can launch us into even greater opportunities in life. Let me just share one example with you as we close. In 605 BC, Jerusalem was invaded by the Babylonians. And the king of Babylon was King Nebuchadnezzar. And King Nebuchadnezzar had the trait, unlike many other rulers, that when he would invade and conquer a city, he wouldn't just utterly destroy it. He would often take that which was most precious and valuable and bring it back to Babylon, modern-day Iraq. So they would loot and raid the temples, and they'd take the gold and the silver and the jewelry, and they'd bring it back. But King Nebuchadnezzar took it even further. He would always tell his raiding armies, when you capture everyone, find the best, the brightest, the most beautiful, often from the royal family, and bring them, and only them, back to Babylon. And what they would then do is they would engage them in a 3-year process of transformation, a slow process where they would cut their hair, they would change their clothes, they would change their names, they would teach them a new language, they would teach them a new religion, they would completely reprogram them, all with the understanding that they are beautiful, that they are bright, they are the best of the society. We are going to turn them into Babylonians to serve in our country. And so there's a couple of individuals that you probably heard of that went through this process. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The very start of Daniel chapter 1 speaks of this process where these 4 individuals were brought into Babylon to be completely changed in very subtle ways. It wasn't like they're going to turn them and change them overnight. It was going to be a period of time. And so Daniel was one of these individuals. His name was changed. He was taught a new language. He was given the royal food. They put him in the royal palace. I mean, they wined and dined these individuals with good things so that they could subtly pull out that which was most important to them. But Daniel caught on to what they were doing. He realized the subtlety of the good things given to them were actually pulling away the most important. And so what did Daniel do? In verse 8 we read in Daniel chapter 1, Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. Daniel said, you can give me the best food, you can give me the best drink, I am not going to eat it. Or drink it. Essentially, Daniel says, you can cut my hair, you can change my clothes, you can change my name, you can teach me a new language, but I will not eat your food. And the appropriate response is, huh? You kind of missed that one. Let's try that one again, all right? Here we go. Daniel said, you can cut my hair, you can change my name, you can teach me a new language, but I will not eat your food. And the response is, like really, Daniel? Food and wine? You're going to draw the line in the sand at food and wine? What? Why? Now, there's a lot of speculation as to why Daniel may or may not have said no. But the point is he drew a line. He says, I will not take any more. I'm not going to fall prey to these subtle ways of what you're trying to do to me. And this is interesting. This is not just some New Year's resolution that Daniel is making. This could have cost him his life, because the guards were not happy about this. The guard says, whoa, whoa, whoa. You're not going to eat the good food and drink the good wine. You are going to look like a disaster out there. And then the king is going to come, not only looking for you, he's going to be looking for me. Daniel, there is no way. And Daniel says, too bad. I'm drawing a line in the sand. And then there's an amazing verse. 2 words. Verse 9. Now, God. Daniel began to build a wall and says, I will not be pushed any further. This is my measure of self-control. And God showed up. You go on to read what happened. And God made the guard look upon Daniel with favor. So the guard says, all right, I'll give you 10 days of only water and vegetables, and then we will see. And guess what happened? After 10 days, God enabled Daniel to be healthier. And so the guard says, well, that's it. Everyone else is drinking water and eating vegetables. Not a great way to make friends, but I'm sure he had other ways to do it. And then it goes on to say, and then God enabled him, increased his wisdom and knowledge, his ability to interpret dreams. And Daniel continued to rise through the ranks. Daniel built a wall. Daniel said, enough is enough. I will go no further. I will not fall prey to the ways of this world. And God used him. One of the opportunities that we have as followers of Jesus is that when we begin to practice self-control, to practice the ways of God, not only does it protect us, not only does it deepen our faith, it has the potential to launch us into new opportunities to be used by God. Jesus often speaks about the parables, that if we're faithful with a little, he will give us so much more. How are we being faithful to God in the midst of how we live our lives? So I want to encourage you this morning. The reality is we all struggle with this issue of self-control. But how do we engage God in such a practical way that in the day-by-day struggle, we say, Jesus, I need you to be at work in my life. I need to begin to build these walls around me, not as a form of legalism, not as a form as look at me, but as an opportunity for me to experience the grace of God more and more in my life. But we got to be intentional. We can talk all we want, as long as we want, about walls. The reality begins to come true when we, like Daniel, make up our mind and start today to say in a practical way, Jesus, I want to follow you. So spend some time this week. Look at the areas of struggle. Look at the areas of consistently giving in and saying, God, how can you help me? How can I establish some practical things in my life so that I don't continue to get closer and closer to the edge, but I can follow you in all things? Please stand as we sing together.